Hi, I'm Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com, and in the last video in my raccoon series, I happened to mention that I was going to be doing an experiment to see if it would be possible to effectively reproduce mask designs. I wanted to get a lot of detail in them without having to do a whole lot of detail work and additional work once the piece came out of a mold. And I got something that was close. It worked well enough that it would be worthwhile doing some more experimenting, but frankly it got just a little bit too expensive, and unless I wanted to go into the wolf mask business or something, sell hundreds of them, it really wouldn't have made much sense for me to go ahead and spend another $40 to make one more mold to show you how well it could work if you actually did everything right. But I thought I should at least tell you what I was doing in case there's someone else out there who would like to maybe take the experiment just a little bit farther. Now I can tell you that there are much less expensive ways to do it. It does take a little bit more time with that detail on the front, but you can effectively use Kevin Dehaney's method, and I'm going to put a link to it right down below this video. What he's doing basically is making a positive mold the way I do in my mask book, like the way that you would do it if you were just going to make one mask, and then he puts plaster cloth over that positive mold, just like I did when I was making this mask in a negative silicone mold. His clay positive mold cost, a couple of pennies, and mine cost $40, so you can see why there's a really big difference. Unfortunately, when you do use a positive mold like that, like I mentioned in the mask book, if you're going to put something over it, then you're going to lose a lot of the detail. You have to be fairly simplified in your design. I didn't with this one. I went ahead and made a positive clay model with a lot of detail and a lot of undercuts, and then made a silicone mold from it. Then I made two masks. I had to do two of them because the first one I put way too much plaster cloth, probably 3 or 4 layers in some areas, and I put so much that the mask actually became too small for it to get on my head. It also had a lot of air trapped under the plaster cloth that I just couldn't feel because the plaster cloth itself was too heavy on there, and I just couldn't feel it when I was pushing the plaster cloth onto the silicone mold. By the way, you don't need a release of any kind if you're using plaster in a silicone mold, so you don't have to worry about having oil or something on the face of it. That's one good thing. When I did my second one, I only used one layer of plaster cloth in the mold, and because I really wasn't expecting it to work, I didn't turn on the video. It's really flimsy, of course. Just one layer of plaster cloth. It has very little strength, but it worked really well to capture the details, and I only ended up with one air bubble right on the nose. I was not expecting it to come out of the mold very well, but because the silicone mold is so flexible, I was able to do it without actually damaging or distorting the shape of the mask. Then I went ahead and added a layer of blue shop towels using a gesso recipe. Basically, it's out on my blog. It's just drywall joint compound, Elmer's glue, and water. And then I also did just a little bit of an experiment here using some epoxy sculpt just to see if that would make it even stiffer. Now that this is dried for maybe 3 or 4 days, it's totally bone dry. It's got one layer of the shop towels and one layer of plaster cloth, and yet this is a really strong mask. And this rough over here that is a little bit flexible, little bit. It would be pretty hard to break. You could, if you throw it on the floor and stomp on it, you could break it. I can see kids doing that if they were using these masks in a play or something while they're roughhousing around. It would be possible to break. The one area here where I put the epoxy sculpt, it's basically an epoxy putty. It's incredibly stiff. It's just paper thin. It's also really expensive. So now, why did I kind of stop this experiment? Basically because it just got too expensive. I was thinking, once I got this out of the mold, I was seeing things that I didn't really like. I didn't like the way the eyes are. I wanted a heavier muzzle. And then what happens, of course, is that if you're using a silicone mold and you see flaws in it, you have to start over. You have to repair the original model, the sculpt that you made out of clay, and make another silicone mold. So I did repair the model, but I didn't order another $40 worth of silicone. I just, like I said, I don't want to go into the wolf mask making business, and that kind of expenditure just didn't seem reasonable. And then I decided, well, okay, I've gone to all the trouble of making this this new model, the new improved version. I wanted to see if I could get at least one mask off of it, just using the one layer of plaster cloth over the model, just to see if maybe I could get enough detail if I didn't just lay on that plaster cloth too heavily. And this is what happened. So what did I learn from the project? Basically that you can use a silicone mold to make a very sturdy, very strong, highly detailed mask using one layer of plaster cloth. You can't use one layer of plaster cloth over a clay model that has really deep undercuts, because it's just not going to survive it. You can also use a very simplified clay model with just one layer of plaster cloth like Kevin Dehaney does, and that'll be okay, because if it's really simplified, no undercuts, then once the plaster cloth, even just one layer, is dry, you'll be able to pull it off without distorting the shape. I think he also lays one thin layer of saran wrap over it. I'm not really sure about that. You want to make sure that you watch the video. It's been a while since I've seen it. The other thing that I have learned is that if you can get away with using just one layer of plaster cloth, either in a silicone mold or over a clay model, it will be strong enough for a mask if you support it with paper mache on the inside. This gesso recipe, the joint compound and the glue, when it dries, makes a really, really strong support when it's used with that blue shop towels. Now, even though I kind of abandoned the experiment because it started getting too expensive, and because I don't want to go into the mask making business as far as reproducing the same design over and over again, I can see that there would be some really good uses for it, especially if you need a whole lot of masks. You need that detail in each reproduction, because you just don't have time to go back using a positive mold, and you would have to go back and add all the fur or all the details around the eyes or the nose or whatever. And if you feel that would just take too much time and it would be worth the expense of making a silicone mold instead, then I can see a really, really positive use for this process. So I do think it might be worth more experimenting. I just don't want to do those experiments because I don't want to spend the money. But if you do, I'm sure that there's probably a lot of things that I missed or that I could have done and didn't do. So if you do any experiments, please come back and leave some comments so that we can learn along with you. And in the meantime, come visit me, ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.